So you're thinking about starting a podcast in 2022? Well, I'm going to be honest with you. You really shouldn't bother starting a podcast this year without watching this video. Because here's the thing, I'm going to share some tips and tricks about building the foundation that will be a successful podcast, and you're not going to want to miss it. Even though the podcast world has a reputation for being oversaturated, the fact is there is still a lot of space for high quality, well-produced podcast content. And before you get discouraged about that, look, it doesn't take a lot of years of experience or a lot of technical know-how to create a high quality and well-produced podcast. Honestly, I think the biggest thing that a lot of new podcasters are really in need of, rather than like fancy microphones or good editing software, is really just a super strong idea and a confident host. If you're good at talking and you have interesting things to say, then you can learn all the rest of it. Those are the two most important things that you need to start out with. Since I've already made my ultimate guide to podcasting for beginners, in this video, I want to focus on some of the less tangible, more ethereal things that it really requires to make a podcast successful. So if you want to see the technical stuff about like how to actually upload it to Apple Podcasts, how to record high quality audio, all that great stuff, it's in this playlist, so you can go check it out. But in this video, I'm going to talk about the factors that you're going to need in order to actually grow an audience for your show and maybe eventually monetize it. And what exactly does a successful or monetized podcast look like? As you might be familiar with, many creators are actually making a pretty significant income from their podcasts. According to this awesome video from Shelby Church, which I will link in the description, podcasts with high listenership can be making up to tens of thousands of dollars for ad spots in each episode. Even podcasts with modest listenership like mine can make money off of their podcasts. Watch until the end of this video, actually, if you want to learn about how I started getting brand deals for my small podcast called Creator Club, because I'm going to share with you the exact email that I send out to brands and stuff. So watch to the end for that. But the great thing about podcasts is not only can you monetize them in a traditional sense by like selling ad spots to brands, but you can also use podcasts as a very effective way to generate traffic and leads to your website, to your products, to your services. It can be a really, really great way to find new customers or clients, which is a big part of my personal podcast strategy with the Creator Club. Without even considering the financial side of all this, podcasts can be a really great way to grow your community, funnel them to other platforms like Instagram and YouTube, where you maybe already have a presence, make new connections through potential interviews, and learn new skills. So if you weren't already convinced to start your podcast journey this year, then hopefully throughout the rest of this video, I can give you some tips that will give you the confidence to dive in and get started. Before we dive in though, I feel like I'm kind of in need of some new podcasts to listen to myself this year, because I've got a number that I definitely listen to every single week, but I always love discovering new content. So if you have a favorite podcast that you've been listening to a lot lately, let me know in the comments, because I kind of want to check out some new podcasts this year. With that being said, the first thing that you need to do to start to build a successful podcast in 2022 is create a really strong premise for your show. Just like all your teachers told you in high school, every essay needs a good thesis, and every podcast needs a really strong idea or mission or purpose behind it. You need to start with a strong perspective or point of view. You can't just be another generic interview show, because trust me, those are a dime a dozen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You need to make sure that you are coming to this with something a little bit different, a unique take or a different angle. I mean, if you want to start an interview show because you would find it personally fulfilling or it's a passion project of yours, I definitely wouldn't discourage you from doing that. But if you are starting a podcast because you want to be able to grow your business with it, generate leads, or grow it into its own revenue system, then you really want to make sure that you have something that is going to separate you from the crowd. Part of that is going to be getting a sense of what else is out there. So do your market research, get on Apple Podcasts, get on Spotify, search some of the main keywords that might be associated with the kind of show that you want to make, and see what else comes up. Pick out a few of the popular shows, listen to an episode or two, and maybe even jot down some notes about what defines them as a brand or what they're offering through their podcast. Then I would encourage you to think about what you are planning to offer and how it might be different from what else you see out there. Now, that different approach can just be your vibe, your personality, your brand. Because I'll be honest, when I started the Creator Club podcast, there are a hell of a lot of different social media marketing podcasts out there. I am not under any illusion that what I'm doing is completely unique, but I am coming to it with my own perspective and my own brand, which might just vibe with a different type of audience. Personally, what I've found out there in terms of like personal brand, social media marketing educator podcasts, a lot of them tend to lean into this sort of uber feminine side. A lot of them really like to talk about like manifesting, like positive thinking, like a lot of that sort of woo-woo stuff, which is fine. That's their bag, but it's not mine. And so I kind of come in with my own personality of just complete honesty, talking about my mistakes, being really real, and talking about how like it's freaking hard sometimes and there's not like a magic solution to everything. And that might suit some people really well and it might not suit others. Like I'm not necessarily going into this thinking that I'm going to steal listeners from existing podcasts that are under that description, because I do have a different vibe, but I'm going in hoping that maybe I can fill a little bit of a hole in the market for other people like me that might be looking for realistic, honest, down-to-earth social media marketing podcasts. That's just one example. This whole video isn't just about like the success of my personal podcast, but I'm just using that as an illustration to show that just because there's other podcasts out there with the same sort of subject matter doesn't mean that you can't pursue that. It just means that you have to think about what's your angle, what's sort of different from the way that other people approach it. And that could either be your own personal experience that you're bringing to the table, that could be the subject matter, maybe the subject is just really unique, or maybe it's your personality. Just make sure that you have a really strong premise for your show before you get started, and that is going to help you a ton when it comes to growth. The next step is to plan some episodes that are both highly searchable and also highly clickable. This is honestly the formula for success across any type of content platform where people are searching for like high value content. So this is the same thing on YouTube. This would be the same thing with blogs. Podcasts are also the same. And this can be a bit of a tricky balance to strike, I'm going to be honest. It's a little bit of an art and a science, because you want to make sure that you're using keywords that people are looking for and that you're kind of optimizing that title and that description to make sure that it is going to show up in searches that people might have. But you also don't want to just make your title completely optimized for like the robot algorithm. You need to make sure that it's also interesting and curiosity inducing so that when a human being actually sees that title, they want to tap on it and press play. And here's the thing, with your title strategy, you might have some titles that lean more towards clickable and others that lean more towards searchable. And that's okay. Like I feel like there's going to be some content that you can frame in a really clickable way that might be harder to throw keywords into. Like sometimes if you pepper it with keywords, then it becomes less enticing to your actual listener. So you need to find some balance there, but I would really recommend when you're first starting out that you have some good keywords in there, because especially if you don't have an existing community on other platforms that you're going to be sending over to your podcast, then you want to make sure that you have some way of people finding you. So here are some examples of my top listened to episodes from my own podcast to give you a sense of some titles that might work well. My top listened to episode ever from the Creator Club podcast is called How I Grew from 1K to 5K Followers Fast. Now I'll admit this one is a little bit less searchable, but I think part of the reason why it's my top listen episode is because it's one of the first few episodes that I published. So that's a good reminder if you're starting out that a lot of people, no matter when they find your podcast, might start binge listening from the very start and listen to every episode, or at least listen to your first few ones. So you want to make sure that you start out strong. This clearly was a strong title because a lot of people pressed play on it. A lot of people pressed play on it, but to me, it's quite clear why this was enticing. It's a very obvious transformation. So if you're trying to make a title like this, maybe it's not about gaining followers, but think about how you can frame a transformation of how I went from A to B and then adverb. So maybe fast or easily or without any research or whatever it might be. Okay, so another really successful title from my podcast was How to Grow from Zero, the First 5 Things I Would Do with a New Instagram Account. So again, how can we translate this to your niche? Think about how you could describe something that you've done or something that your listeners would want to do and basically frame it as starting from scratch. So maybe that's how to start from zero, though it depends on if your thing has like a number associated with it. How to start from scratch, what I would do if I was starting over, or whatever it would look like for you. Another one of my really popular episodes was my Instagram strategy for 2021 exposed. So I think a great way to frame this in another niche is just like my personal approach to X exposed. People love the word exposed. Like it really is enticing because you're like, oh, well, what about it haven't you been sharing, right? So I just think that's a good way to frame it, and you can kind of fill in the blanks with whatever subject matter you're actually talking about. Once you've got some good titles planned out for your initial episodes, the next step is to focus on delivering value every time. The most important thing you can do to grow a dedicated listener base with your podcast is to consistently offer high value episodes. And look, I know this can be really difficult because posting something really good and really interesting every week, it does take a lot of work. Like it really does. There's not a really quick or easy or hacky way around this. It just takes time, research, planning to make sure that you're offering something interesting to your listeners. Here's the thing, even if you manage to get people to your show through really highly searchable episode titles, and you get people to press play through really clickable episode titles, if your podcast is just really boring or slow paced or not really that interesting, you're not going to get people to subscribe. And because you never really know what episode people might be listening to first, you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward every time. The main thing that you do need to know, and I don't want this to discourage you from starting, is that long form, high value, interesting podcast episodes take a lot of time and a lot of research. Like that's the most time intensive part, even recording a 30-minute to 45-minute episode, you're probably going to spend 5 to 10 times that amount of time actually planning and researching it. And it can get faster as time goes on, and especially if you're talking about subjects that you are really experienced with and you have just a lot of that info up in your brain, then it can go quicker. But I just find like writing, 3,000 to 5,000 words, like that takes a lot of time. And you'd be surprised how many words it takes to fill up the length of podcast episodes that you're probably aiming for. So as much as I don't really have super tangible like little check boxes you can click off for this one, it's just important for you to know that a new listener could find you through any of your episodes, and you want to make sure that each one of them is convincing people to subscribe. Hey, are you enjoying the video so far? If so, like and make sure that you subscribe. And while you're here, I wanted to quickly tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Podcastle. Listen, Podcastle is like the best tool for beginner and experienced podcasters who want to be able to record, edit, and publish their episodes all in one beautiful and user-friendly place. Podcastle is a tool that you can use completely online to record either solo episodes for your podcast or interviews, and you are going to be able to capture really high quality audio that you would not be able to get just from your typical video conferencing app. The best part is you can record inside Podcastle and then immediately start editing, or of course save your project for later and come back to it. There's really, really great editing tools inside Podcastle that are easy to use for beginners. Of course, you can trim off the beginning and end of your episode, or you can make cuts in the middle. Plus, Podcastle has a royalty-free audio library, so you can add sound effects and intro and outro music. This is all without having to download a single file to your computer. And what's super exciting is Podcastle is launching their mobile app. So not only can you do this all from your laptop completely inside your web browser, but you'll also be able to produce your podcast entirely on your phone. I've been working with Podcastle for a while and using them to edit my podcast, The Creator Club, and I can tell you that they are a great team that is really working on producing a product that is super helpful and solving the problems of podcasters everywhere. They've got these really cool extra features like Magic Dust, which just cleans up your audio and makes it sound like you recorded it in a professional studio. And this great little feature that automatically cuts out silences and long pauses so that you don't have to spend all of your time doing the grunt work of just cutting out places where you stop to take a sip of water. I really could not recommend Podcastle enough for beginner podcasters. It is going to make the process of recording, editing, and publishing your podcast so much easier. So if you want to check it out, I've linked it in the description. You can sign up totally for free. I really recommend it, and I'm sure once you get started, you are not going to want to stop doing all of your recording and editing inside Podcastle. So thanks again to Podcastle, and back to the video. Once you've got your podcast up and running, the next essential step to growing is to ask for reviews and also listen to feedback that you receive. So starting out with the reviews thing, I would recommend in each of your episodes encouraging your listeners to review you on Apple Podcasts, because a lot of people, first of all, are listening on Apple Podcasts. That probably represents a big amount of your listener base. And the way that a lot of people might find shows on Apple Podcasts is through the charts or recommended podcasts. So if you want to get your podcast into the Apple Podcast charts, getting reviews is an essential part of that. So what I like to do each week on the Creator Club podcast is shout out one of my previous reviews. So read a review from a listener, say thank you. I encourage people to leave their Instagram handle in the review so I can give them a little shout out. And then I say, if you'd like to have your review read on next week's episode, then make sure you go leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. So that's something that's good to do on a pretty regular basis. Something else that I tried out recently that seemed to be really effective is running a little giveaway. So basically, as a thank you to people who leave a review, you can run a giveaway for a determined amount of time. So for us, it was the month of November. So I basically said anybody who leaves a review throughout the month of November will be added to a draw for an Instagram audit. So my business, Creatorly Media, does Instagram audits where we basically do like a deep dive review of your Instagram and tell you what you can do to improve your growth. So that normally is something we charge for, obviously, but I was giving it away for free as a prize for a reviewer. And that helped generate a lot of reviews throughout the month. So it's something that I definitely want to do again in the future, just here and there as a little thank you for reviewers, and to encourage people who might have been thinking about leaving a review but just haven't got around to it yet to go ahead and do that. And that definitely improves your Apple Podcast chart score, as well as the number of downloads you're getting each week. So it all helps. It's important to encourage your listeners to leave a review. Another way that you can kind of take in feedback and make sure that you are doing everything you can to grow is by taking a look at your podcast stats. So I personally do this using Chartable. Chartable is something you can sign up for free and like see how many downloads and plays that you get on your podcast. And these are amalgamated stats. So it shows you stats from like Apple and Spotify, and I think Google as well. So you kind of get a total. And you can go back and look at which episodes got the most plays, got the most downloads. Of course, you want to actually read your reviews and see if people are leaving you any feedback that you can act on. And that should help you figure out what sort of topics you can return to, or just other ways that you can improve your show to continue to get more listeners. And finally, to top it all off, once you have a good process in place, you're creating those episodes that are clickable and searchable, you're asking for reviews, the next step to keep this growth going is to post weekly episodes, like for at least a year. Now, I know that might sound like a long time, especially because a lot of us are used to instant gratification. We want things to happen fast. Look, I know I'm impatient as the rest of y'all, but in my experience, I have gotten discouraged about the growth of my podcast, and it felt like it was never really going to grow. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, it's a good learning experience, but is it really helping? And finally, after several years of posting pretty consistently to my podcast, I've started to see some traction. And I think that really just goes to show that it can take a long time for people to find your podcast. Like, it is a search-based platform. Like, it just takes a while of people searching for the kind of content that you're talking about over like months and years, and then eventually finding you and subscribing. So it's just gonna organically grow over time. Of course, you can help speed up this process by posting more frequently. So if you want to post bi-weekly episodes, that's going to help you grow even faster, because essentially you're putting out double the content, which means double the potential search terms that people might be searching in their podcast app to find you. So it's just really important that you stay committed to it and post frequently, and eventually you will see that growth. Now, once you do start seeing a little bit of growth and you want to turn this into something you can monetize, like I promised at the beginning of the video, I'm going to tell you about how I started getting brand deals from my podcast. So full transparency, obviously I already have some brand deals set up for this YouTube channel, and I have for, a couple years now. And basically the way that I transitioned to starting to get brand deals on my podcast is when I was in a bit of a busier season and kind of had all my potential sponsorship slots filled up on my YouTube channel, and I had a sponsor request come into my inbox. It's kind of like a right place, right time thing. I was like, oh, somebody that I would love to work with, but I just can't do it on my YouTube channel right now. Maybe they'd be interested in sponsoring the podcast. Because around that same time, I had started to see that our numbers had really increased. And so basically I replied with this email. This sounds like a really cool platform that my audience would definitely be interested in. At the moment, we don't have space for brand deals on my YouTube channel, but my podcast has some openings. And then basically just like a little description that the Creator Club podcast is a social media marketing and content creation podcast. At the time, we were in the top 10 marketing podcasts of all time. Now we're still in the top 20. And then I listed a couple stats about our listenership, how many downloads we get and all that. And then basically said, this is what our brand deals cost. We recommend doing 3 episodes for the most effective response, and would you like to move forward? And this worked out for us, obviously. We were able to work with the brand, and I recognize that this opportunity came up because they were already reaching out about this YouTube channel, and not everybody starting a podcast is going to have that existing platform. But what you can do is use a really similar email format to what I sent and start reaching out to potential brands. So you can say, I've got this podcast, we talk about X, Y, and Z, this is how many listeners we have each week, I think we'd be a great fit, would you like to work together? And that's basically how you can start getting some brand deals for yourself on your podcast. It doesn't have to be a super complicated process with getting a network and yada yada. You can just start sending pitches. And I actually do have a brand deal pitch template that you can download for free. It's slightly different than this one because it's for YouTube, but you can easily modify it. I'll leave the link in the description. It's also at katiesteckly.com/pitch. But you really can, as a beginner creator, start getting those brand deals for yourself if you just reach out. All right, y'all, thanks for sitting through another long video of mine. I hope this was helpful as you're considering starting a podcast this year. I really wish you all the best with it. I feel like I have learned a lot through my podcast journey, and it's been a lot of fun. So I really encourage you to just go out there, get your podcast started, and let me know in the comments what your plan is, what your show's about, all that stuff, because I'd be really curious to know. And of course, if you want to know all the technical details, I have this whole playlist walking you through it, but if that still feels overwhelming, then my business, Creatorly Media, actually does help creators edit their intro and outro, get their podcast launched, or edit your episodes on a weekly basis. So if you'd like help with that, I do have a link in the description to our services page that you can go check out as well. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you are having adventures and following your dreams, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.